when Kara invited me to do this presentation, I of course said yes immediately, because that's what everyone does to Kara when she calls and asks for something. She's just a force of nature, is the way I describe her, and I think has been a terrific partner. I mentor a lot of people, as she mentioned. I have about 180 folks that directly report to me or report to someone that reports to me, and on almost any given day, I'm having some sort of a mentoring or helpful meeting with someone. And I use a lot of aphorisms when I do that, because I think that in a short, pithy phrase, you can get across a lot when you explain what that means. But what sticks in the person's head is the short, pithy phrase. And one of the phrases I use a lot are, a million little things can add up to one big thing. And one of the most important little things that I ever did was agree to go to a dinner at Mark and Megan Kwame's 3 years ago, where she was sitting next to me at a table. It was towards the end of the worst of the pandemic, but we were still kind of in pandemic mode. Mark and Megan were hosting an individual from Africa who ran an orphanage and trying to get individuals from Central Ohio interested. My wife and I had a lot of other things we could have been doing, but I said yes to Megan, and I met Kara, and now I'm here. So a million little things like that add up to one big thing. So another way to look at that is, don't close an opportunity. Don't close the door when someone invites you to a lunch and you don't know who you're going to lunch with. You just never know who you're going to meet. Your board chair, for example, we were walking in, says, do you happen to know Raquel Reinbold? I was just in Philadelphia for 3 days with her as she was graduating from a national leadership program on Thursday. So it's just a small world. And actually, Professor Lammers, I was in the MBA program at Ohio State from '98 to 2000 and took your class. So it's a small world. So you might be asking, why is this guy here talking to us? As that introduction that Kara gave, we're a $5 billion organization. We represent over half of the Ohio State University's budget and over half of the staff. But I think when you think about what Ohio State University does, obviously there are graduates that are here. We educate a lot of people. We do a lot of research and come up with new discoveries, but we also provide a lot of patient care. I won't ask you to raise your hand, but I would expect all of you in some way, shape, or form know someone who's gotten care at my facility. Most people don't understand that only half of our admissions to all of our hospitals at Ohio State come from Franklin County. Another 16% of the admissions come from the contiguous counties that ring Franklin County. Fully a third of our total admissions to the hospital come from the rest of the state. And that's if you take East Hospital, which is our community hospital, out of it, and you look just at the James Cancer Hospital, it's 45% come from the rest of the state. Same thing for the Rossart Hospital. In our Brain and Spine Hospital, 50% of the admissions come from the rest of the state. So I spent a large part of my 30-plus year career at Ohio State getting to know people in all those communities. The hospitals that are in your communities, chances are I know or have met their chief medical officer. I know their CEO. I know the chief nursing officer. In fact, during the pandemic, I was very honored. Governor DeWine asked me to be what eventually became known as the Zone 2 leader. There were, actually, to mention Amy Acton, it was her idea to set up these 3 zones. And Zone 1 was kind of Toledo through Youngstown and everything in the north. I had Central Ohio all the way up to kind of like the Bell Fountain area. And then everything south on 23, south on 33, and east on 70. And then Zone 3 was basically the Dayton and Cincinnati areas. But I had 40 hospitals and health systems across 37 counties that I talked to every day during the pandemic at different periods. We were partners. We moved equipment around, ventilators. We moved medications. We moved patients. It was wonderful. But those relationships didn't start in March of 2020. They started 20 years earlier in terms of my leadership time at Ohio State and my commitment to what goes on in the rest of the state of Ohio. So I have to say, yesterday, Kara's team forwarded me your bios and the little paragraphs about your presentations. And I knew generally what I was getting into when I said yes to do this talk, and we've talked a lot about the fellowship program. But taking some time last night to read through your personal bios and what you're doing, I frankly was more inspired than I even thought I would be coming here today. Especially because I had in my mind, this was a lot about K through 12 education, and certainly many of you work in that space and work a lot with kids. But I really walked away recognizing that many of you are working on things with mental health or prevention of addiction or encouraging recovery. Food insecurity, which certainly is a healthcare related topic. It just struck me of really the depth and breadth of what you're doing is just really inspiring to me. But back to the idea of why I'm here. I might look like a guy who's an executive at a large business in Columbus that certainly is not in Appalachia. I'll start with this. Oh, darn it. Sorry, there's a bit of a delay. I'll start with this. This is a map. Who's here from Jefferson County? Mike DeSenza, right? Yeah. So this is Jefferson County. This is a map from the 1850s. On the left in Jefferson County, here's kind of where it would be today, that little red dot. My sixth great grandfather crossed the Ohio River in the 1790s, before Ohio was even a state. They set up a farm where that little red dot is up there, and kind of where the map expands from in the Jefferson County map. It's up in Ross Township. And this is a Library of Congress map, which I thought was the coolest thing. It actually goes down to the Platts. So anything you hear IS is the Shane family. Isaac Shane was my fifth great grandfather. His father was born in New York City in the 1740s. Back then, I looked up New York City only had 5,000 people. I'm like, okay, even the guy born in New York City was from a small town. When you think about 5,000 people in New York City, emigrated to Western Pennsylvania, then to what was then the Northwest Territory here in what is now Ohio, and they set up a farm. And that farm, there's the Isaac Shane on the top left. That's his gravestone. He was born 6 years before George Washington was president, and he died 15 years after the Civil War. Talk about a span of time to live. So that's his house at the top photo, built in the 1830s. That's the house today. One of the nice things, we had to cancel a vacation during the pandemic, so my wife and I took a day and drove to Jefferson County and toured around, and I hadn't been there since I was a teenager, and the house still exists, which was wonderful. You fast forward to Isaac's daughter. It's interesting, I do a lot on Ancestry.com, as you might guess. Normally, the women on Ancestry.com are listed by their maiden name, and I was really confused when Susanna Shane was married to Joseph Shane, and it listed her as also a Shane, when I realized they were first cousins. So I got that in my family history, too. And we all turned out okay, you know, so. Yeah, and Isaac Shane was an amazing guy. Started out a Jackson Democrat, turned into a Whig and a Republican. The stories are that this was part of the Underground Railroad. His farm was part of the Underground Railroad. He was a member of the legislature in the 1840s. I had no idea. Did you know Richmond in Jefferson County used to have a college? And he was actually one of the charter trustees of Richmond College that ran for about 80 years in Richmond, Ohio. He's an amazing guy. This is his granddaughters here on the right. This is Helen Shane, who is my third great grandmother. Very interesting woman, lived to be 85, outlived her son, who was my second great grandfather. Her sister in the back, Jessie Shane, went to the Cleveland College of Physicians and Surgeons and was a doctor practicing in Steubenville and died in the mid-1910s. But if you look back through my entire lineage, no one went to college until my parents' generation. So, you know, sometimes you would think of, okay, you've been in Ohio for over 200 years, you'd think somebody would have gone to college before your mom or dad, but they didn't. This is my great-grandmother, Ruth McLean. Actually, this is her husband, Morris, Andrew Scott, who I'm actually named after, from his middle name. My parents there at the top. This is me and my grandparents. But I put this picture into my brother because actually he's probably the one who you should have speaking here today. You know, we're from a little town called Louisville, which is in Stark County. Stark County is not part of Appalachia, but I'm 10 miles from Columbiana County. I looked to see who's, there were Tommy and Kaylin from Columbiana County. Yeah, so I'm from Louisville. I know one of you is from more East Palestine, but I think, Tommy, you're from kind of the western part of Columbiana County? Yeah, perfect, yeah. So I never really thought of myself as from Appalachia, but I think I kind of am. So this is kind of nice. Anyway, so we'll move forward. So what I want to talk about a little bit about today is leadership. And this is, I told Kara, I think I fit 10 pounds of information into a 5-pound bag of time. But what I want to try to do is just give you some nuggets. I teach a semester-long class on this at Ohio State to senior undergrads. And what I've tried to do is basically do a survey of the topics I talk about. We're going to go deeper into a couple of them in about 90 minutes. And where I usually start in talking about leadership is thinking about, I want you to close your eyes for 10 seconds and think about a really effective or really ineffective leader that you've worked with in the past. And what are the things that come to your mind in terms of how you would describe them and why they were effective or why they were ineffective? Just take a minute or a second to think about that in your head. Could be a coach, could be a teacher, could be a parent, could be a community leader. Who wants to share some characteristics of an effective leader from your experience of being led by them? I know you're not bashful. I'll call on Andrea Blackstone because she's from the other Louisville, Ohio. It's spelled L-E-W-I-S, where we're L-O-U-I-S, so go for it.
I would say concern for your people.
Concern for your people. So that's the effective leader, right? Yeah, concern for your people.
A good listener.
Good listener. A couple more. Yeah.
Willing to engage in jobs they're asking you to do.
Gotcha. So wouldn't ask you to do anything they wouldn't do themselves. Willing to engage in jobs they're asking you to do. Yeah. Willing to learn from others. Great. Yes. Present. Great. How about an ineffective leader? Sure, none of you have ever worked with anyone who's an ineffective leader. Micromanaging. Yes. Yeah.
Like emotionally unregulated.
Oh, wonderful. That's about 6 slides from now. We'll come back to that. One more. Anyone? Yes.
Poor communication.
Poor communication. So think about the positive and negative attributes we just referenced, right? Did anybody say anything at all that was related to smart, intelligent, not smart, not intelligent? It's a lot of what we heard describing were how you felt being led by that person, right? So as you think about it, it's that Maya Angelou line, people will not remember what you said, they'll remember the way you made them feel. And I think if you don't take away anything else from this talk today, just recognizing that the impact you have on others isn't about how smart you are, isn't about what degrees you have, isn't about what extra training you've done, it's about how you make them feel. So one of the interesting things for me when you think about leadership is just how many different types of people could be described as a leader. Oh, there we go. It's going to have a little delay in this. So these are just pictures. I assume some of you know who some of these people are. There's generals. That's Eleanor Roosevelt at the top, Albert Schweitzer, Martin Luther King. Even Stalin, pretty bad guy, all things considered, but certainly was a leader, as you would define that. Oppenheimer there in the bottom left, right? There's scientists. And then you get into all sorts of other folks that might be, social leaders in terms of actors, musicians, athletes. It's leaders, it's almost like they talk about how many words there are for snow in Inuit, right? We use one word leader to describe all different types of folks. So as you think about it, there is no cookie cutter of what works and what doesn't. It's more about the process that you use than anything else. And this is one definition that I've always kind of liked. It's pretty simple, straightforward. It's a process of social influence in which one person enlists the aid and support of others in the accomplishment of a common task. The root of it, when I think about what your projects are in your communities, you're trying to get other people who live there locally to get on board with your ideas. It may not even, it's in their best interest in the long run, but they may not recognize that at the front, right? And you'll get all these slides. You don't need to take notes if you don't want to. How do you get them to engage in a task with you? Well, I break it down, and this is how we'll organize our time today, into kind of 5 things that you need to have a good understanding of, whether it's about your current thing you're doing now or the thing you're going to be doing in 10 years or 20 years in your community. knowing yourself, knowing your role, knowing your team, or who are the people that are in this with you, understanding the problem you're trying to solve, and then understanding the goal. And we'll walk through 2 or 3 kind of nuggets for each of these 5 areas. And then I'll also send Kara and her team the resources that I mentioned. There are a number of references in the slides. I can send the original. You have some of these articles already that I've sent you before. So, in terms of know yourself, cover 3 things. Leadership as a competency, leading with authenticity, and then how do you flourish as an individual? Probably some of you who watch TV shows or recognize some of those faces on the right. And I give this talk, similar type talks a lot to medical students and resident audiences. And the Dreyfus model for attaining a competency in leadership is no different than attaining a competency as a doctor, a nurse, a lawyer, a teacher, whatever it might be. At some point, you're a novice. Then you become what's called an advanced beginner. You have, like that, in our case, that would be an intern. They are beyond med school, but they aren't really competent yet, so they have a lot of supervision. Then you become competent, proficient, and then expert and master are my 2 favorite levels because they sound kind of the same. And we'll reflect on this at the end around level 5 leadership. The difference between expert and master is an expert loves their box of knowledge. They love their technical skills. They love when someone asks them a question about their box of knowledge. And if you ask them a question that's outside their box of knowledge, they say, that's not what I do. Go see the person up the street or go see the person down the hallway in that office, right? They're an expert. Master, on the other hand, if you think about Yoda, like as a Jedi master, right? The master has all those pieces, parts of expertise in their field. The master loves the question they don't know the answer to. They love to go out and find something new or find a connection. You saw this all the time, I'm sure, Professor Lammers. You're an expert in this. There's someone 2 floors away that's an expert in that. It's the 2 of you having coffee together to figure out the new thing based on your 2 fields coming together is really where the magic happens. So as you think about where you're at, leadership is exactly the same. Just as if your competency was hitting a baseball, your competency was woodworking, being a teacher, whatever it is. Leadership is not something that you are born with. Leadership is not something someone gives you with a title. Leadership is something you learn. And that's why you all being involved in programs like this at your age, in your generation, is going to be very, very valuable. So from a leadership perspective, you move through these steps just the same. One of the things, in fact, we sometimes see, it's a very common issue in academics, is the person with the longest CV, who's got the most research grants, gets named the department chair. Never seen that happen, I'm sure. It's kind of like, think about it in a business, the best salesperson, right? That person has real skills in communication, real skills in building relationships, real skills in understanding the product. You take your best salesperson and you make them the manager of the sales team, whole different skill set to manage people, whole different skill set to understand the financials of budgeting, all sorts of other things. Oftentimes, this is when people in their 50s who have attained mastery of their technical field then take on a leadership role for the first time. They just kind of assume they're expert at that too because they're an expert in what they do, right? They misunderstand that leadership is a competency. The levels of control, very different. Let me tell you, if I wake up, we have, as Kara said, I often make the comment, and this will resonate in this audience, to our residents, when someone is coming from one of your communities to Columbus to be admitted to our hospital, and remind them that these people might be a little intimidated because more people work at our medical center than live in their county at 24,000, right? The level of control I have with 3,000 plus healthcare providers, like doctors, advanced practice nurses, interns, residents, and fellows, I'm not in charge of anything, right? My job is to put the right people in place who put the right people in place who are the ones at the bedside who do the right. Now, I break down barriers, I do all sorts of things, but my level of control, very different. Level of responsibility, far different. I have 1,500 people who slept in beds in my facility last night. My phone goes off 24 hours a day. Something's going on with one of those 1,500 people that I need to help with. Measures of success and failure will be different, and certainly individual versus team accountability. Whole different thing in a leadership ballgame, but that's why some people fail at understanding the difference between their technical skills and their leadership ability. You need to understand where you are on that trajectory, what you need to get to the next level on that as a leader, Because if you underestimate or overestimate your leadership capabilities and skills, you won't be able to be as successful. Authenticity, something that's really important to me, something I try to live every day in what I do. You know, having been at Ohio State for 33 years, I realized on June 30th of 1995, I was Andy, the med student. On July 1st of 1995, the next day, I was Dr. Thomas, the intern. These same nurses that had worked with me for 2 years as the student, now suddenly had to call me Dr. Thomas. That made no sense to me. I had a mentor, Clay Marsh, who actually was at the same conference in Philadelphia with me this week. I hadn't seen him in a couple years. He always said, call me Clay, call me Clay. That's why everybody calls me Andy. Like, the housekeepers call me Andy. That's just the way I roll, right? I try to be my authentic self with people. Now, authenticity, if you look up in the dictionary, obviously consistency between, you know, practice what you preach kind of thing, right? Consistency in your words and your deeds. Coherence in performing different roles. Like when I'm a doctor on Tuesday mornings, seeing patients, I have to be kind of the same person when I'm in our finance close on Friday, right? I can't be two different people within the organization. When I'm teaching class on Thursday afternoon, I kind of have to be, it's different topics, different skills, but I kind of have to be the same person. Communicate consistent underlying messages, but this last piece about authenticity is what's most important. Being comfortable with who you are and understanding that. So you're not trying to put on airs, you're not trying to be somebody you're not. Trust me, people read through that in a minute. In fact, there's how many of you ever seen the Johari window before? You ever heard of the Johari? Some psychology classes teach it. It's kind of old, it's from the 50s, but it still works for me. You know, most of life as a business school student, I learned can get broken down into 2x2 tables, right? So what the Johari window talks about is what is known to others. So in other words, I'm wearing a blue blazer, I'm wearing khakis, I have glasses, that's stuff that's all known to you, right? What's known to me, I know a lot of things about me, right? But there's things I don't know about me. So the stuff that you can see and that I can see is stuff that's open to information anyone can see. The stuff that you can see that I can't, bad breath, dandruff on my shoulders. I mean, I know that my zipper might be down, I don't know, you know, it's all sorts of things, right? But you work with someone long enough, you see things in them that they don't see in themselves, right? So I know I have to surround myself with people in my life that are willing to tell me. Now, first and foremost, my spouse, trust me. She kicks me in the shins all the time if I start to believe my press clippings and, you know, all those things, you know, no, come on. You were still late for dinner, you were still didn't take out the trash, whatever. She puts me right in my place, right? But there are also things that I know that other people don't know, right? And when you think of yourself as the leader in people that you lead, there's stuff going on in their lives that you have no idea. Their spouse is sick, their child's having trouble at school, their parents are getting divorced. You know, there's all sorts of stresses going on in people's lives that you don't see unless you probe. But the key thing about this is when you look at how do you make those boxes bigger or smaller. So if I want to learn more about myself, I need to solicit feedback. Let's see if this has a laser or not. Yeah, if I solicit feedback from the people around me, suddenly I learn more about myself. If I disclose things to a point, others learn things about me. They see me as a 360 of a person and not just a person with a title who sends out emails, right? Then when I got COVID, I had been lecturing the state of Ohio on TV for, I guess it was 10 months at that point, about how not to get COVID. And then I got COVID. And I had to actually do a medical center town hall the next day that was just scheduled. 1,500 people dialed in, and I'm in my basement. I was never in my basement for those before. And enough people knew that I had COVID, I basically just announced it. And I said, I just want to let you know I'm in my basement. Got diagnosed with COVID yesterday, just so in case you're worried, I'm feeling okay. But I want to walk through with you the emotions of what it was like to get COVID. First, I was kind of shocked because I thought it had been pretty safe. Second, I was kind of freaked out, right? Here, I know what happens with COVID. Third, I was worried for my family, because what if my kids got it? What if my in-laws got it? What if my dad got it, my wife? Next, I was really embarrassed. Here I'd been this guy saying about how not to get COVID, and then I couldn't protect myself. But the last piece was I was actually kind of reassured when I thought about the systems we had in place, the teams, the training, the people. If I did get sick, I was going to be fine. So go on the rest of the hour-long webinar updates for our team. I got emails you wouldn't believe from people I didn't even know of those 24,000 employees, saying, thank you so much for sharing that. You know, I felt the exact same way when I was the nurse who had been telling everyone in my family to be safe and not get COVID, and I got COVID. And it just, that moment of opening up, as opposed to some people like, oh, I don't want to share that because then I'll be embarrassed. Just being open and honest. It's amazing when you can self-disclose and expose yourself a little bit to people. It's amazing how much more effective you'll get. And as you see, as these lines move, there was this area we haven't talked about, the stuff that was unknown, right? Stuff you didn't know and stuff other people didn't know. And based on the way the model is set up, you cover new things that nobody knew before, and you eventually learn more. So authenticity is just a great way to engage others. Brené Brown is one of my personal favorites. I think Kara's as well. Authenticity is a daily practice of letting go of who you think you're supposed to be and embracing who you are. The other secret thing about this is, as I mentioned with that blind spot, there's others that see things in you that you don't see. They also see things that you're trying to fake it till you make it, right? That you're trying to be something that you aren't. The time and energy you need to put in to be that person that's not really you, it's not the authentic you, it zaps your energy that you can use for other things. Last is, and know yourself, is how do you flourish? How many of you have ever read anything by Marty Seligman? He popularized positive psychology. He's a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania. You know, psychology used to be all about defining your illness, and he was one, amongst others, was one of the first people that really pushed this concept of there's actually a model for health and mental health as much as mental illness. And he's defined 5 things in PERMA: that people that live with positive emotion, people that engage with others, people that do something that's meaningful, have a value in life of what they do, people that certainly need to accomplish, as they accomplish tasks, that adds to flourishing. Your sense of well-being is based on your accomplishment, that's fair to say. But that last piece of relationships is really, really critically important. Personally, for me, I love the meaningful life. But I live the good life. I live good happiness a lot. There's times when suddenly I look up at the clock and I'm 20 minutes late for a meeting because I've been knee-deep in a spreadsheet or knee-deep in reading something, or in a mentorship meeting with someone, I run way over time. That flow is really a great feeling if you've never had it. For those long-distance runners, they kind of know what that's about. But, you know, at the same time, the pleasant life is still pretty good sometimes. It's great to laugh at a funny movie. It's great to go out to dinner with friends. There's no deep subject you're talking about. So I've kind of found I need parts of all 3, as Kara knows, because she was on call to bail us out. Me and 5 guys rented a cabin in Hocking Hills last weekend to watch the Masters, and just trust me, there was not a whole lot of meaningful going on or flow. It was just relaxing. So it's still good to do all 3 of those. But just as you think about your own, remember, this is the end of the Know Yourself section. As you think about what sustains you, you need to find a way to do this that makes you happy and keeps you happy, or else you're not going to be able to do what you need to do for your community. A little bit about know your role. Talk about management versus leadership. Talk a little bit about influencing the mood of the folks that you are working with, and then how to cultivate new ideas. So this is an old article, 1990, John Cotter. It's a great article about what's the difference between management and leadership. Because they're 2 terms that kind of sound pretty synonymous if you just stand back at 1,000 feet. Was really a big difference. Management, as you can see in the bullets there, you know, planning, budgeting, kind of making the trains run on time sort of stuff, right? It's how do we get a process and how do we make sure that we're compliant with the process, and we do some quality improvement on the process. It's a lot about how you cope with complexity in a business, in a community, right? I mean, somebody has to be the principal of the high school or the chair of the English department to make sure that everything's being managed, right? It's a very different skill set than what you're trying to do with the fellowship part of the hat that you wear, which is coping with change. How do you give people a vision for where you want to go? We're going to talk in a few slides about leadership styles based on the issue at hand. But how do you motivate, inspire them? How do you get them to see combinations and patterns and ideas they haven't seen before? Everybody knows how to read the monthly schedule. That's not complex stuff. That's under the management category. But how do you get them to see a vision of what your business could be, of what your school could be, of what your church could be, your community could be? That's what we're talking about with leadership. So when we talk about knowing your role, every now and then, you still got to be the person that knows how to budget. You got to be the person who knows how to manage an HR issue that comes up, right? You need to be a manager too. You can't be just a leader. But trust me, management skills aren't going to get the type of change you're trying to make in your communities. Management skills alone aren't going to get you there. So this is about the mood. I don't remember if you ever went through Sen Delaney training. We had a couple of different administrations. We're very excited. Larry Sen was a faculty member at the business school at USC. And he was brought in to do training for our senior executive team, and we kind of cascaded it down through the med center side of the organization. It's a 2-day course you went to. It was actually really, really good. But they had all these little stories they told that were memorable. And one of them was this concept of the mood elevator. And actually, it's in my bag. I still carry my card with me. This is my mood elevator card. It's all like worn because it's in my wallet. But the concept is good moods at the top, bad moods at the bottom. But from a management leadership perspective, the idea was if you're in a meeting and the overall mood is worried and anxious, or someone's being self-righteous, right? Angry or hostile, probably not the right meeting to make big decisions in. Probably not the right time to really drill down on the nitty-gritty, because the mood in the room is either not going to lead you personally, this is about you also, if you're personally in any of these moods, to make good decisions, or a group to make good decisions. So sometimes your job as a leader is just to read the mood in the room and recognize that tabling this today might be the smartest thing, and we come back in 2 weeks. I see some head shaking. I see you've been through these kind of scenarios before, right? But to understand, the key thing about this isn't the concept that bad moods are hard to make good decisions. It's this middle part. And this is what when I'm mentoring people that are in conflict with each other. Because, I have to work with all 24,000 people, right? And one of my funnest things is when I have great relationships with two people who aren't getting along. Because then we call it marriage counseling, but I can actually help in that setting, right? Because I have credibility with both parties. And if I can get them to understand each other better, that can get 75% of the problem solved. But the way I talk to them about this is I said, if you're in one of these bad moods, it's not like you can go from stressed and burned out to appreciative and hopeful, like just snapping your fingers, right? But if you can just get yourself to curious, if you can just get the people in the room to curious. Now, I can tell we're disagreeing on this, right? Can you explain to me again why you are wrong? No, I'm just kidding. Why you are thinking that way? Because I know you're smart and I know you care about this project, but we're not agreeing. And the first time that I was a resident, the first time I had a faculty member, a hematologist by the name of Eric Kraut, sickle cell expert and leukemia expert, I was his resident, so big power differential. Back then, he was probably younger than I am now, but it seemed old, right, when I was like 29. And we were disagreeing on how to handle the discharge of a patient and what we needed to do. And this was in front of the intern and a couple students, our social worker standing there, and he goes, Andy, I can tell we're disagreeing here. Can we step back for a minute and start again? And I was like, oh my God, I'm getting fired. This is not good. I didn't know what was coming at me. So the other thing you need to think about when you're the leader, your role is to help the mood in the room. You got to explain to people what you're doing, right? You can't just kind of do like Jedi mind tricks, right? You got to kind of help them understand the process you're walking them through. But your role in terms of the mood of the team, mood of the room, mood of yourself is really important. This piece, you could do a whole hour and a half just on this slide. It's a great book called Creativity Rules by Tina Seelig. She's actually an engineering professor at Stanford, but it's basically a business book. And she spends a lot of time in the book talking about the 4 words in red there, which if, once again, kind of like leadership and management, you stand back at 10,000 feet, they all kind of sound the same, right? We're doing new stuff with new ideas, right? But she spends a lot of time in the book, and as you guys think about the innovation you're trying to drive in your community with whatever that paragraph I read about your project is, there's 4 steps you want to think about. So imagination, as she writes it, is using your brain to envision things and ideas that don't exist today, right? That's like imagining a story. Nobody's ever written that story. Imagining writing a song or a poem that's never been written before. It's a new idea, right? It's new to the world. That in and of itself is a step. Creativity is taking either things you've imagined or that someone else has imagined and written about, which is why reading about this stuff's really important, and actually saying, hey, nobody's ever taken that imaginative thing and actually applied it to a challenge that I have. Right? So it's ideas that are new to your situation but not new to the world. Right? They might be new to you too, right? Because it's something someone else imagined. That in and of itself is a step. The third step is taking those ideas from a challenge and actually crafting solutions that are new in the world. That's innovation. So it's actually applying the creative thinking to that problem and coming up with solutions to specific challenges. And then the last piece, entrepreneurship, is the concept of there are a whole lot of innovative things that never got out of people's garages. Right? There's a whole lot of innovative drugs that got designed that never got marketed, never got approved by the FDA, and never went anywhere. There's a whole lot of ideas that you might make work on your street that you can't make work in your town. Or they work in your school, but they tried that at the middle school in the next town over, didn't work. This idea of entrepreneurship is how do you take those innovations and actually do them at scale? Doesn't mean that doing innovation alone is bad or you failed if you're only able to innovate and get it done just in your town or on your street, right? But part of why the power of all of you together is important is that last step of how do you do these ideas at scale? And how do you do things so that the fellow 5 years from now from your county picks up that project and it continues? We'll talk at the end a little bit about level 5 leadership and this idea of how do you get things to be sustainable. But if you ever, once again, nuggets, this could be a whole hour-long lecture, but Tina Selig's book, Creativity Rules, as you guys are thinking about what you're doing in your communities, there's a lot in there to learn from. Know your team. This is a really important set of topics. I'll just walk through these. How many of you, I know many of you are teachers, have ever read any of Howard Gardner's stuff, The Theory of Multiple Intelligences? Some of you are familiar with it. This idea that we all know what like traditional smart is, right? It's those people that do well on ACT tests, right? Or traditional smart, right? It's really math and language smart. But there's all these other ways of being smart. So as you think about the team you're putting together, right? Like I think personally for me, here I was, I guess I was in college at the time. I was maybe a junior in college, pre-med, Ivy League school, all that kind of stuff. I worked for 6 summers for the city at home. First summer, sewer plant, $3.35 an hour. Trust me, I was 16 and I knew I was going to college. But second summer, the water plant was fun. Painted 350 fire hydrants, me and a yellow can of paint. My boss would drop me off at 8 a.m., pick me up at 11. Like we'd map out how many fire hydrants I could do in 3 hours. I had a little transistor radio that I carried with me. Then another summer at the water plant. Then I did 2 summers mowing baseball fields, which was awesome. But one of the guys that I mowed baseball fields with, this would have been maybe summer after my junior year, this guy named Greg Metzger. Wonderful guy. He knew the name, like Latin genus species, of every tree we saw in the park. Every bird that we would see. He could like go out in the woods and like live for 3 days. I would not make it 6 hours, right? It's a different kind of smart. But it's just as smart as me who got a good score on the SATs, right? And as you think about knowing your team, I mean, how many folks from your towns that sat next to you in 8th grade math and didn't get A's? But let me tell you, if you needed a deck built, if you needed your car fixed, if you needed somebody to drive an hour in the middle of the night to pick up your kid that was injured when you were out of town, let me tell you, those are the people that are really smart for those tasks. So it's how do you find the value that anyone in your community can bring to your project. It doesn't mean they need to understand how to do spreadsheets and the finances of your project, but maybe they are an interpersonal leader. They're great at building relationships with people. Maybe they're visual. They can do your posters, right? Maybe they're just smart about themselves. They're really composed, right? They're intrapersonal smart. So they're really relaxed. They can be the buffer in the room because they don't lose their cool. Whatever it is, one of my secret sauces at the university is I try to find the unique way that everyone can bring value to our team. Now, most of those people have graduate degrees, right? It's a whole different type of thing, but it's still, people are smart in different ways. And I think you and your communities, if you really focus on who's on your team, you'll find ways that people haven't felt valued before because they don't have a diploma hanging on their wall or because they didn't even finish high school. You can find a way to make them feel valued that they didn't feel before by understanding this. The one great example, if you need something to stick in your head about multiple intelligences, is think about Forrest Gump, right? Was Forrest Gump, I assume most of you have seen the movie Forrest Gump. Was Forrest Gump what you would consider traditional smart? No, right? One of the things up here is kinesthetic smart, body smart. Remember Run, Forrest, Run? Remember the ping pong? He was like a ping pong champion, right? But spatial smart, visual and spatial is like, sculptors and that. Remember, he could take his rifle apart faster and put it back together than anybody else in his unit. He had the spatial smarts. And if you remember, he knew how to love people. Whether it was Jenny or Lieutenant Dan or Bubba, right? He knew how to make interpersonal. There are people in your community that no one has ever recognized they're smart, and you have the opportunity to do that. Also, personalities. We're not going to go through all these. Most of you, I assume you've done Myers-Briggs testing at some point through your life. If you haven't, there's websites you can go out and do it. It is important to learn a little bit about yourself. This will reflect a little bit later in the leadership styles perspective. But in my class, spring semester, we do Myers-Briggs testing on the students. There's usually about 20 to 25 students in the class. It's kind of interesting. They learn, sometimes they've done it themselves in a different class, right? But they usually score it and learn something about themselves. But the way I actually teach it is we have everybody sit down and I say, will the I's in the room stand up? And half the class will stand up. And in our case, sometimes it's a little less than that for the introverts. And I say to the E's that are sitting down, you guys have been together for 4 years in this degree program. You've taken 80% of your college classes together. You probably know these people better than some of your siblings. I want the E's that are sitting down to talk about what the I's bring to this group. And then we reverse it, right? And then we go through, the T's and the F's, right? We go through the J's and the P's and have people stand and say, recognizing that as a team, as a group, you kind of need all the personalities around the table. And oftentimes conflict that you're having is coming from just someone has a different personality type than you do. And you don't realize they're actually introverted. They're not aloof. They're not blowing you off. They just really need some personal time, right? They just communicate differently than you do. But it's just understanding their personality, just like their different types of intelligence, will get you a long way. Then emotional intelligence, someone over there brought up when we were talking about leaders that were not emotionally regulated, I think was the term you used. Emotional intelligence, I assume many of you have studied this at some point in college as well, or in school or along the way. But again, nice 2x2 chart. The idea of IQ is, people think it's fixed. I'm not sure it's really fixed, but people say IQ is fixed by the time you're in your teens. But emotional intelligence is not. There are studies, whether even therapy, frankly, where you can really learn the skills of emotional intelligence. It's about being aware of your own emotions, being able to manage your own emotions, being aware of others' emotions, and then making sure as you're managing your relationship with them, you're taking all this into account. If you think about the flip side of emotional intelligence, and I certainly don't like to be stereotypical, but the typical person who has trouble building relationships and recognizing the emotions of others right? We sometimes talk about autism spectrum disorders or Asperger's syndrome. It's one of the facets that sometimes patients with those diagnoses carry. It's hard for them to build relationships because they aren't able oftentimes to read when someone else is upset and they just keep asking questions, right? It's for them, it's a challenge, right? But as you think about it, there are ways to help them. There are ways to help you to get from being reasonably emotionally intelligent to being really emotionally intelligent. Sometimes you weren't raised in a home where this was valued. Sometimes in your community it's not valued. Sometimes it's just you never took time to think about it. Some people are just generally, these are the interpersonal smart people. They just were born that way. They get it. But there's a way to build that, unlike IQ, like I said, which is thought to be fixed. So it's an important thing. It's not about being touchy-feely, but it's about being honest, right? It's not about being nice all the time. It's not about being emotional, but it's being aware of your emotions. So the last piece is recognizing what's the culture in the team. And once again, this can be an hour-long talk in and of itself, but I love this definition of culture. System of shared beliefs, values, customs, behaviors, etc. Members of society use to cope with their world and with one another, and they're transmitted from generation to generation. I know what it's like in my town. Like, my brother, it was one of the photos at the front end, still lives there. How many of you ever seen It's a Wonderful Life? We used to watch it like 10 times every Christmas back in the day. It was on like every channel when we were kids. He is George Bailey. I am Harry Bailey, right? I'm the one who went to Columbus. He still lives in Louisville. He's the guy who sponsors he's a dentist, sponsors the Little League baseball team. He's on the church consistory. He actually ran for the school board. I don't know what he was thinking, but he did and enjoyed it. He was on the board of Stark State, which is the technical college in Canton. In fact, there was a profile of him in the paper that said, we don't know what committee Dr. Thomas isn't on, right? He understands the culture of Louisville and Canton in a way that I don't. I live in Columbus now, right? I can't understand the culture of the places you live because I don't live there. I understand there's a culture and I respect that culture, but you all have the opportunity by being engaged in your communities to understand why 50 years ago something happened that people still talk about that has changed the culture of your community. It's transmitted from generation to generation. That culture is oftentimes built as a way for the people who live there to cope with their world. Maybe it's when the plant closed, right? Maybe it's when the mall burned down. Maybe it's when they built the highway and it went around our town and we don't get a whole lot of traffic anymore. Something happened 30, 40, 50 years ago that has changed the culture of your community. You all are geographic experts in that culture that nobody from Columbus or Cleveland or Washington, D.C. can ever understand as well as you do. And that's a value. It's helping you know your team, right? Know the problem. Let's see, how are we at on time? So I have till 12:45? Is that right? 35? Okay, sure. So, understanding the type of problem you're looking at. So this is a relatively complex chart, but on the x-axis here, when you think about solutions, so solutions that are close to certain, or problems that have solutions that are close to being certain or more unknown, right? Less far from being certain. And how easy is it to get agreement on the solution versus hard to get agreement on the solution? If you have something that's pretty certain and everyone agrees on it, probably a simple problem, right? The further you get out on either axis, you get to complicated, then you get to complex. If you don't understand the problem at hand, you will come up with the wrong solutions. So there's a great book called Getting to Maybe. I highly recommend it. It's probably 15 years old now. But they break those simple, complicated, and complex problems down incredibly effectively. So simple problems, any novice can do. Now, I'm not a great baker, but it's baking a cake, right? There's a recipe, there's ingredients, there's steps. It kind of looks like a cake, probably, when you're done most of the time. If you're successful at doing it once, you're probably going to be successful at doing it again. That's simple problems. Simple problems need simple solutions. Like, let's write a policy. That means you can define the problem, you can define the steps to fix it, define the escalation if those problems don't fit, right? You can write a policy. Complicated problems are subsets and combinations of simple problems. So they use the example of launching a rocket to the moon, which to me sounds incredibly complex. But the way they describe it is there are formulas that are all about how you launch a rocket to the moon. There's some about thrusts, something about navigation, about the strengths of the welds, right? It takes expertise to launch a rocket to the moon. A novice can't do it like baking a cake, but it's really, the expertise is in about each of the formulas and the combination of those formulas. It's about the interrelationship of the simple problems and how do you do that at scale with coordination, with your specialized expertise, and you can get a rocket to the moon. Success is not reducible to any one of the simple problems, but if one of the simple problems isn't taken into account, that's how you get like Apollo 13, right? And they're just making stuff up as they go to try and land safely, right? And then we get to what you guys are dealing with, which is complex problems. There are not formulas. There are not exact ways to do it. This is based on principles, based on values, and how you communicate those. It's a combination oftentimes of simple and complex problems, but the local conditions make it so it's not really formula-based, right? It's non-linear. There's uncertainties, there's ambiguities. The success, well, they use raising a child, right? Some of you I know mentioned being new parents in your bios or have kids. We have 3 kids, 28, 26, and 16. They're almost like different generations. The way we parented our 28-year-old when he was 5 was very different than the way we parented our 16-year-old when he was 5, who had a 15 and a 17-year-old sibling in the house. There was stuff on TV that the younger kids would have never seen. There was food in the house. Like, I still remember when Jake came bopping down the stairs with a bag of Doritos. He was about 4. And like when the little kids were, or the older kids were there, that food wasn't even in the house. And it's a Saturday morning, I'm at my desk, and he comes in like all orange. Right? He's got this bag of Doritos. I'm like, buddy, where'd you get the Doritos? Michael's room. Yeah, I mean, his brother was still asleep. He went in and grabbed the Doritos. Just because you're successful with the first 2 doesn't mean you're going to be successful with the third, right? It's not reproducible, right? But it's really, we have kind of values and principles with which we raise our kids, right? We don't spank our kids. We try not to use 4-letter words around our kids until they're now, almost adults. We don't scream at our kids. My wife was much better at this than I am. I was raised in a family where from the time I was 10, if I went to school and there were any clothes on the floor of my room, the closets weren't closed, the bed wasn't made as it was supposed to be made with the pillows right and everything. Any of those things I didn't do right in the morning, I didn't get to watch TV that night when I came home from school, right? Relatively strict house. Now, I think it turned out okay, but Lisa, on the other hand, had this mindset of our kids need to push boundaries somewhere in the world. I would rather have them push those boundaries at home than in the world. So they don't need to clean their rooms. Oh my God, my head exploded. I mean, now, like the Queen Elizabeth wasn't coming to visit, so it didn't really matter that much, right? She was like, so their rooms are messy, who cares? Nobody's gotten pregnant, nobody's got on drugs, I mean, like, that we know of, but, that they were good kids. And we had to, like, you work up your grades or to the level of your ability, right? So Michael, very math, science smart, studied in study hall, get all his homework done, go to soccer practice, come home. By the time I got home, he was just sitting there playing video games. I'm like, how do you get all A's? You don't do homework. I just did it at school. Our daughter, on the other hand, very social, lovable, leader of every club she's ever been a member of, captain of the cheerleading team, captain of the golf team, you name it. Talked all through study hall, or was at a club meeting, right? And would come home, would be on the phone, or would be talking to Lisa, and about 9 o'clock at night, she'd be like, oh my God, I have so much homework to do, right? Very different approaches, but the principle wasn't to be rule-based, you had to have your homework done by 7 o'clock, right? The principle was you work up to your ability. And they both got great grades. In fact, by the end of high school, she had a higher ACT score than he did, a better GPA, got into a more competitive college, right? And now I walk into, last Christmas, walk into the family room and they're arguing about something. It's who has saved more money. I'm like, okay, I win as a parent. That's not about who has a nicer car. It's about who has more money in their 401k. Yes. But anyway, It's not about rules when it comes to complex problems like raising a kid. It's just not. It's about principles and values and communicating those, living with ambiguity, because it's complex. It's not about certainty. It's not about if we just do this, this, and this, suddenly unemployment will go down in our community. It doesn't work that way. Or more kids will graduate from high school. It doesn't work that way. So I'll skip through a little bit of this. So making sure that you're understanding that the tension that comes with complex problems is actually something you can use to your benefit. But you can't leave it at the tension level about the problem. You need to translate that into the energy that becomes the solution, allows you to amplify that, right? And really, it's about the relationships and who you have around the table and how you have them around the table that allow you to solve these things. And questions are more important, and mindset is more important than certainty. I'll skip through a little bit of this. We're running a little long on time. So, leadership styles. So, hearkening back to the Myers-Briggs testing, certain leadership styles kind of come more easy to different types of personalities, right? You probably remember when you were a kid, there was always kind of like the bossy person who was figuring out where we were going to play kickball or whether we were going to jump rope or whatever you're going to do, right? There was always somebody kind of in charge, even as little kids, right? It just comes easier to them personality-wise. And I think the same thing is true in terms of when you're an adult. So these are Daniel Goleman, who wrote a lot about emotional intelligence over the years. This is from a Harvard Business Review article. It's now 20 plus years old, about 6 different leadership styles. And they aren't perfect definitions, but they're pretty close. Those top 2 are kind of the dyad of what I need you to do. So coercive, as it sounds, is, you go there, right? I'm telling you, you're going to go there. Where authoritative, sometimes in his writings called visionary, is about we are going there. I've already chosen where we're going. We're not having a discussion about it, right? I'm authoritatively saying we are going there, but not you are going there. We are going there. You're leading somebody with your example. The next 2, affiliative and democratic, sound kind of similar. Affiliative is about how do the people feel about the solution that you're leading. Democratic is what do they think about the solution that you're leading. I tend to be more of a consensus person. I tend to live in affiliative and democratic most of the time. But let me tell you, when there are 3 IV fluid manufacturers in the country, and one of them gets shut down by the FDA, and that's the one you buy IV fluid from, and the other 2 IV fluid manufacturers don't have the capacity to sell you IV fluid, and you're like 6 days away from not having IV fluid for your 1,500-bed hospital, you got to get coercive, right? If I sit around for 2 weeks and say, oh, let's hold hands and think about the solution, and there's a time to be affiliative. It comes most easily to me. But if I don't have the muscles built to be coercive and say, we got 15 people together, and it wasn't my plan, frankly, I know the least about this as anybody. My job is to synthesize and prioritize. My job's not to have the ideas. That's a whole nother piece. But we had to announce it, and the 3,000 healthcare providers had to go along with it. There were no other options. If you don't have that coercive muscle exercised, you will make bad leadership decisions in the wrong situation by using the wrong style. These bottom 2 are also really important, the diet of pace setting and coaching. Pace setting is the one I think that is probably the least valuable of all of these. That's, I can run a 4-minute mile, why don't you go do that, right? It's about, I get all my stuff done, why aren't you getting your stuff done? Coaching, on the other hand, is let me help you figure out how to run faster. Let me help you figure out how to be more time efficient. Coaching is pace setting I found very little use for of the 6. But the analogies, this is actually the front piece from the article in Harvard Business Review. It's obviously more written from a business perspective more than a community project initiative perspective. But it's that executive with a golf bag. And it may be hard to see from the back, but the 6 golf clubs there, each represents a different leadership style. And his concept in the article is, I assume many of you know, at least understand basically what golf is if you don't play, wouldn't use your putter off the tee. You wouldn't use your driver to get out of a sand trap. At some point, you're going to find yourself at a point in the course where you need to use a leadership style or a club that you've never used before if you don't practice these things. If you don't extend yourself beyond the comfort zone, it's like having a really, really strong bicep and weak triceps, right? That doesn't work in the long run because at some point you need to do that, right? So working on all these things and understanding applying the leadership style in the wrong setting is important. You don't want to do that, and you don't want to not know how to do one of the leadership styles. Skip through. So this is the last section, and we'll break and hopefully have time for some questions. Knowing your goal. And this is the one probably that I continue to learn the most about, something Kara's actually been very helpful in making me even think, and I've been doing this for 30 years, but I learn something new every day. Growth mindset. I assume on many of your teachers, Carol Dweck, Stanford, the whole growth mindset concept in the K through 12 education space is you're not smart yet. You haven't mastered that skill yet. Don't get depressed when you got a C this time because we're going to help you. You worked hard. The effort is just as important as the result. I tell you, in a world of medical school where, frankly, I can look up everything online, memorization is not nearly as important as it was. My ability to talk to a patient, do a physical exam, that you can't get from the textbook or from up-to-date online, right? Or from a journal article. Growth mindset is incredibly important for these K through 12 students that many of you have worked with in the past, that you know they have the capability to be better, but if they get locked into being a C student when they're 12, they're always going to be a C student when it comes to school, right? How do you inspire them? Think about that relationship with you as a teacher and them as a student or a parent and your child. How do you do that for a community? How do you create a table where we've used all these leadership skills we've talked about? You're visionary, you're understanding the team, you know your role, you've got people, positive energy. How do you get the community to have a growth mindset so that you're not stuck in where you're at now, but where your community will be? We don't have a new business here yet. Our graduation rate at the high school is not where we want it yet. Not like, oh yeah, this is never going to work. I don't have the secret sauce for this. I'm still learning how to do this as an individual. But I think this is one of the key things you want to be thinking about leaving this weekend or for the rest of your time as a fellow, the rest of the time living in your community. This is a book Kara got me a couple weeks ago, actually. I'm sure she's going to talk more about it. It's called The Science of Hope. Hope Rising. Hope Rising, How the Science of Hope Can Change Your Life. I spent my weekend in the Hocking Hills reading it when all the guys were still asleep because I still get up at 5 in the morning, even when we're in the Hocking Hills. But they write a lot about hope is not, I hope you have a good weekend, right? That's really, I wish you a good weekend, right? There's not much I'm going to do to make sure you have a good weekend, right? But hope is this concept of you have the opportunity to change it. So you have to have a desired goal. You have to have an endpoint you want in mind. And they talk about willpower, which is your energy that you're willing to dedicate to it, but also way power. What's the pathway forward? So hope is something that you can change in people. I'm still learning this is a great book. I think it's something that you will all really like. Conceptually, it'll resonate with you. Here's one of the quotes that I found best out of the book. Hope is the belief that your future can be brighter and better, and that you actually have a role to play in that. Once again, getting a person, a sibling, a cousin, a friend to have hope when they have cancer or to have hope when they lose their job. How do you get a community to have hope? I don't know the answer to that question, but I think you all need to find ways in your community to help people find hope. Leave you with a story from Colin's book. It's about the mirror in the window. It's the last bullet point there. That last bullet point there. And I show those videos because I think he explains this a lot better than I do. The mirror in the window, conceptually, is a level 4 leader when there's success, when there's accomplishment. They look in the mirror and they say, wow, I did a really good job. And when there's failure, when there's something that doesn't go right, They look out the window and say, gosh, if those folks would have just done a better job, it might have gone better. The level 5 leader, it's the exact opposite. When things go great, when there's a success in the community, an accomplishment, they look out the window and say, God, what a great job everybody did around me. But when it doesn't go well, they look in the mirror and say, what could I have done to make it go better? It's a subtle thing he talks about, this idea of having professional will and determination matched with humility. When you see it in someone, wow, it's amazing. That's what I want you to find in yourself, not just for the projects you're working on now, but for what you're going to do for the next 10, 20, 30 years in your communities or in your county or in the region. We need to find someone who's going to be the next Kara Dingus Brooke is really what I'm asking for. So